started the business because I had a really large network of really clever girlfriends who had married farmers and left corporate careers, and they just couldn't access the work that they were trained or experienced in where they were living in a rural or a remote community. And so that wasn't just my group of friends. I very quickly realised that that was a lot of people, and it wasn't just people that were physically isolated. It was people with disabilities. It was people from different ethnic backgrounds or other minority groups or other marginalised people in the community, that remote work was a real leveller and an opportunity for them.
Hi, Smart Community friends. In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a fantastic chat with Jo Palmer, the founder and managing director of Pointer Remote, who work with communities, businesses, and individuals to leverage remote work. Jo tells us about Pointer Remote and why she started it, as well as the changes to the business models that have evolved over 2019 and 2020. We discuss the common struggles organisations face in being set up for remote work, as well as the opportunities and challenges in the remote workspace since the pandemic. Jo and I explore the power of local champions to change mindsets about remote work in regional and rural areas and ways local government can support that. Jo explains why in-person meetings with your remote workforce are still required and the importance of a digital footprint to build trust in our digital world. We finished our chat discussing the impact putting women in the work has on local economies and the emerging trend of attracting and retaining professionals in rural communities. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the Smart Community, Smart Regions, Smart Towns, and Smart Cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Jo. How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
That's good. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Let's just jump straight in. Can you tell us about your background and what you're passionate about?
I sure can. So I am the founder and managing director of Pointer Remote. So we work with communities, businesses, and individuals to leverage remote work. So we have a recruitment platform, so like a jobs board for remote work, and we run capacity building programs, particularly in rural communities, to support businesses who are maybe hiring people remotely for the first time or who are looking to use remote work as a way to retain their current staff that they've got or to attract new employees, and work with individuals to really help them get the most out of working remotely, or if they haven't done it before, to actually expose them to some of the technology that's available, the what nots to do for a lot of people who haven't worked remotely before or who have been out of the workforce for some period of time, be it babies or caring duties, or they've been in an office or job that wasn't particularly conducive to remote work. Like a lot of things happened, particularly in the last 12 months. And the third arm of our business that we're working on at the moment, we're hoping to launch in the next couple of months, is a community finder. So it's a decentralisation tool to support people that are looking to move to a rural community, and they can, rather than searching a place name, it actually asks them things that are important to them in a community, and it then shows them, well, these are all the sorts of communities across rural Australia that has all of the things that you're looking for in regards to health and education and culture and all the good things about moving to a new town.
Yeah, wow, that sounds so interesting and really useful. I'm just thinking about, all the things that we've been talking about lately, like fleet changing, moving to regions from the cities due to COVID and other things, and also just the opportunities of remote work these days. And maybe I won't talk too much. I'm keen to hear your thoughts. We're in 2019. Some people were remote working. You were cruising along. You were helping people, get into remote work, hire people remotely, et cetera, et cetera. What were some of your biggest challenges back then that have now been kind of shifted since 2020 came upon us?
look, to put it brutally honestly, from 2017 to 2019, where I was pretty much pushing the proverbial uphill. So I started the business because I had a really large network of really clever girlfriends who had married farmers and left corporate careers, and they just couldn't access the work that they were trained or experienced in where they were living in a rural or a remote community. And so that wasn't just my group of friends. I very quickly realised that that was a lot of people, and it wasn't just people that were physically isolated. It was people with disabilities. It was people from different ethnic backgrounds or other minority groups or other marginalised people in the community, that remote work was a real leveller and an opportunity for them. So I was inundated once we launched right from the get-go with people that wanted to work, and they were like, we had people from all extremes. So I've been working remotely for years and I just want to pick up more work, through to I've never worked this way, but I haven't worked in 15 years and I'm dying to work. I've wanted to work, but this is totally revolutionary for me. Where I found the challenge was that we then had that same scale on the business side of things. So our really early adopters and our clients that we had from very early on who have stayed with us, like we've got one organisation that's hired 9 employees through us over the last 4 years, which is unreal. Realistically, those businesses, they were already doing this in some capacity, or they already had evolved into either a hybrid team of having an office and remote workers, or a fully remote team. Quite often it had happened to hold on to people. So they had amazing people that physically relocated, and they were like, well, we don't want to lose you, so let's make this flexibility thing happen. So we had that one extreme at that end. And then that scale flowed through to the complete opposite end of the scale, which was quite often we had businesses, particularly in rural areas, that were finding they'd been advertising jobs for months, sometimes years, to try and attract someone to move to their town. They were offering extra pay, relocation packages, all of these things to try and get people to move there. And they just couldn't fill the positions. And so they came to us with their feet sort of dragging, that like, okay, well, this is literally our last resort. Please fill this position with someone. And what we were finding was that we would do that and we would find them someone amazing. And then in 6 months' time, we'd get a call from the person that we placed into that job, and they'd be like, this is a disaster. Like, they're trying to run it as if I'm there. I'm left out of meetings. I haven't got access to the things that I need. I'm really feeling left out of the culture. I can't work autonomously, and I can't get access to the manager that I need to be able to do my job. Get me out of here. And we were like, whoa, this is bad news. So that's where we very much evolved from being a connection piece of introducing the people to each other to we need to do a full circle on this. And we had well and truly put the cart before the horse, and we were like, okay, we've got to go back a stage well and truly and start supporting the businesses in particular to actually make it work. Because people can be amazing at the job, but you'll churn them if they're not feeling involved in the organisation, if they don't feel part of the team, if they can't get the information they need to be really effective, because then they are less effective, and that then does a whole lot of other things. So you then get cranky because they're not doing their job, all of the things. Everyone has had that job, whether it's been remotely or in person, but everyone's had that experience of just this sucks. This sucks. If they're not running it properly, it sucks. So I'm actually a teacher by training. I'm a primary trained learning support teacher. And so it was quite funny that I'd left teaching and I've done a full circle back into education.
That is a funny thing. I also have actually my podcast producer. Yes, she teaches people. She's a great educator. She was a teacher before. She left there and now she teaches people how to podcast. So, education is so important. If you're not in the school system, you're in some other capacity. So interesting.
And it's so funny you say that, because I can remember thinking when I first left teaching, I was like, oh, what am I going to do? I'm a teacher. I have a teaching degree. And it wasn't until I sort of realised how transferable those skills were into so many different careers. Transfers into business and managing staff and lots of these things. So to all those teachers listening that think that they're only teachers.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we love them. So 2017 to 19, you're pushing some stuff up the hill. You worked out that you had to change a little bit of your business model. Then 2020 happened. Did you just go gangbusters, or what happened there?
It's been interesting. Look, I think everyone has had their interesting 2020 story. Ours was just as much as an emotional and financial roller coaster is probably the best way of putting it. A lot of, like, as far as the business goes, so I suppose I can look at these in two ways. As far as the business, it was really tough. It was really tough in that a pandemic strikes and businesses pull in purse strings immediately. They freak out about how to even go remote with people at home, with kids, with spouses at home. Like, everyone knows it. It was diabolical, but they definitely weren't hiring because no one knew what was happening. No one wanted to spend money. A lot of people didn't have the capability, systems and processes and all those things to onboard someone completely remote at the start. So that was tricky. Where we then saw go bananas was oh my gosh, what is happening? Like, help us. We have never done this. We are, like, I had a law firm who had 800 staff who was a completely paper-based firm, and they had to send everyone home within a 24-hour period, and they were freaking out, as you can imagine. So we saw that side of the business take a very dramatic turn. What was a bit challenging on that side of things is, and I know it seems counterintuitive, but most of our training that we had done from 2017 to 19 was in person. So physical workshops around remote work, which is completely counterintuitive and not lost on me. So for us to be able to, in true 2020 buzzword, pivot, we had to then get all of our stuff online and be able to deliver it online, which seems, again, ridiculous. We had a lot of it in place already, but it was getting it into something that was easily digestible by people that were wanting us to do things. Again, a challenge was I'm a really small team. Like, there's 2.5 FTE in my team, and I literally crashed and burned. Burnout wise, I was like running on all cylinders and it was exhausting. So yeah, emotional roller coaster, financial roller coaster, all of those things. So it was, the business wise, that was really interesting, tough, exciting, all of the above. As far as the concept, holy hat, like, I couldn't have planned or had something better happen for the concept of remote work. I think I had been living in complete ignorant bliss about how I thought that we would be able to do the mindset change that happened in a 2-week period globally. Like, I think it and I hear a lot of the people that were in this space pre-2020 that there actually wasn't a huge number of us around the world of this, in inverted commas, thought leaders and those. And so I had actually made a lot of friends internationally that were in this space, and what we were all we're quite, we catch up a lot in Slack groups and emails and all of those bits and pieces. And all of us pretty much agreed that it just jumped a generation, really. Like, when people say, in 5 years' time, I reckon it's like a good 25 years. It's moved things forward. It forced government, it forced corporate, it forced small business, it's forced sole traders. Like, literally everyone has had to look at work differently, regardless of your industry, regardless of whether you're a frontline worker or organisation that works like that, or you can be a completely distributed team with staff living globally. It has changed profoundly. So I think for the concept of remote work, 2020 was incredible and the best. And I think what has been really interesting is that at the end of 2019, actually, October 2019, I won an award that was for a project. Like, the award was around a project that my project was around the fact that we had created this job matching platform and that the education piece was what was missing from it. And so the Rural Women's Award project that I put in and won for was this education piece. And literally 2020 then just put this whole thing on steroids. And so it was really interesting that where we've now found ourselves is look, a year on, there is experts in the remote work flexible space everywhere, and we have decided very much that we've come back to our roots, which is the rural space, and how we can really get and ensure that rural Australians and people in rural communities globally, I've got lots of pipeline things thinking, and my brain is always very busy of lots of things to do. But at the moment, for rural Australia, that this is our seat at the table. Like we can apply for the jobs, we can be on national boards and committees, and we can not have to be on a plane. Like that last quarter of 2019, I did 27 flights in 7 weeks. And that was, I live in a rural area. I'm halfway between Sydney and Melbourne and inland, and everywhere is at least one flight for me, mostly 2 if I'm going anywhere else. And I just feel that what has happened in the last 12 months is access to people, to work, to conferences, to all sorts of things. And people just do it now. It's so good. And so that's where we're really finding our space, is how this doesn't fall by the wayside and it just becomes that thing that, again, the country folk are left out of. So what can communities themselves, what can local government be investing in infrastructure as far as co-working and adequate childcare, and what still needs to happen as far as connectivity, which is still a major challenge for so many people in rural Australia. Like that is just still such a thing.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, obviously 2020 was an awful year for a lot of, well, for many, many, many reasons. But I think looking at, what's come out of it, particularly for accessibility, I think is huge. And I was just thinking while you were talking, so I was having a conversation this week actually with a bank, trying to set up an account for a not-for-profit that I'm on the board of directors for. And we're talking about checks, like that you have to have, like, you know, that I have to sign a check and then the president has to sign and I was like, no, I don't want to set up a checking account. And then I'm going, oh, okay, but we're actually all around Australia. So how can we remotely, you know, approve a transaction? And it was impossible. And I'm just like, how is this the thing in 2021? And then I'm just like, oh, right, this is a hard thing. This should not be hard. Like, I'm just like, what's going on here? Anyway, that's what I get excited about these days.
It's so funny, the check thing. We used to, my husband and I lived in Canada in 2012, and we left, well, we'd had 12 months in Europe before that, but we left in 2011 without net banking and doing all of the things, could do all of that on our phone. We got to Canada, we both still got paid with a physical check, and they were like, at the branch when we went to go and open our account, they're like, and we're going to be bringing in the next 6 months this thing called net banking.
You're like,
my husband and I started laughing. We're like, what? You don't have that yet?
It's so interesting because I think in Australia we sometimes, you know, one of the questions that I normally ask, well, actually I often skip it, around like, how is Australia embracing the smart community concept, right? And, you know, a lot of people, oh, we're behind and this and that. And I think there are lots of pockets of innovation happening, but actually some of those really baseline technologies, Australia adopted a long, long time ago, and you don't realise until you go somewhere else. And I was thinking about it, but also vice versa. Sometimes you go to a place, you're like, oh my God, how is this not a thing in Australia? But even going to Japan, and they're like, oh, yep, so you'll need, you know, cash and whatever else. And I was like, sorry, what? Why would I need cash? Like I lived in South Korea for 3 months and, you know, I had cash, but it was all card, you know, you did the thing, which is kind of normal. And they're like, oh, no, you'll definitely need cash. And then when I got there, I didn't believe them, by the way. And then when I got there, I went, oh, right, I really need cash. So everything's cash-based. And I just thought, oh, for super advanced, it's interesting what certain countries hold on to. And it's not because the technology is not there. It's the adoption and the mindset and the reasons why. And so I think in this smart community space, it's so relevant because in each community, it's not that one's like better or whatever than the other. It's just what they've chosen to adopt. And I think you would find the same thing with remote work. It'd be like, well, and I don't know, maybe you have clusters where, you know, there's lots of remote workers. What are those kind of key factors that go into why that's the case? And I imagine, I'm not putting words in your mouth, a lot of the time it is just mindset, right? I mean, connectivity obviously is a big one too, right?
Yeah, I think that the mindset, though, is shifted because you've got the champion for it. So, like I use, say, when you were talking about them, what springs to mind is Dubbo in central West New South Wales. There is a very much champion of co-working and growing your startup from a rural area and having access to all the things that you need in a co-working space. So her name's Gillian Kilby. She runs a beautiful co-working space called The Exchange in Dubbo, and that place is hopping all the time. And I think that people then exposed to it and then they uptake. And I think that that's how the mindset changes, is when you've got a champion in an area. And I think we're finding that very much in, especially because we deal a lot with local government. So especially with the rollout of the Community Finder tool, we're onboarding local governments at the moment. And it's just so interesting to see, because I've chosen economic development officers as my key contact in every rural community, just consistency rather than going to chambers in some towns and women in business in other towns and things. Everyone's got a local government, so we've used them as our sort of cornerstone of it, I guess. But it's so interesting with the mindset of that Eco Dev officer with their uptake of like, definitely promote us, like we're ready, like come, like there's this amazing town that's not far from me called Temora, which is in southern New South Wales. Their Eco Dev officer is incredible. The council works incredibly closely with the business chamber. You cannot get a park in the main street of this town at any time of the day or week because they shop locally. There is hardly any empty shops in the main street. They have a co-working space. They have a brand new 73-spot childcare centre. They have light industrial area with, like, the council has invested money in to attract people to bring their business there, to bring their family there, to bring, like, and it is pumping. Like, it is just the most amazing little town. But it helps when there is a champion of the town and things, and that they rally that whole thing, and that's how you get a mindset change. And you see it, and it doesn't have to be a big community to do that. Like, I think that's what's really amazing around this, is that there's another town that we've done work in, Lake Kajelico in like the Western Riverina. The council and their sort of economic development project, they have put desks and screens and access, and you can go on hot desk in this tiny little town. If your internet's dreadful out on the farm, you can come and sit in there and you get to run into people and you can go and get a coffee and you can do all of these things. And it's a really small place.
Mm. Yeah, and it goes back to community, right? Like, you're creating this community, and this community that accepts or, thrives on people doing things a bit differently. Because let's be honest, it's, well, definitely 2019, but even these days, it's like, I was just having a conversation with someone. They're like, "Oh, do you come into the office very often?" I said, no, I avoid going into the office. I do I like seeing people in 3D, right? But I, as an extrovert, I can get what I need from digital, whereas I find other people can't, which is fine. We're all different. But I was just like, no, I really like my 2-minute commute. But I also like the fact that I have better relationships with my home now, because I'm not like, thinking, and my commute was really long if I had to go to Brisbane because I live in Toowoomba. So Regions is, love this Smart Regions talk in rural areas, because it's like they get the same, and I'm working on projects in New South Wales. So it's like, what are we getting from that experience or that exposure to meeting people one-on-one? And I imagine, and what you do is I find particularly that when I meet people one-on-one, if it's for a reason, or even just like a reason is I wanted to have coffee with them or, have a drink with them, get to know them or whatever it is, then those experiences are so much more rich, because then you're able to, you've done all your work, right? And then you're not just there because, I have to be here. It's, I want to really connect with this person. And so, yeah, I find that particularly in regional and rural areas, that sense of community of like how people do things and what's different and what's, a bit quirky or whatever, and that acceptance of remote work is, I think it has to be that's the mindset shift that we need to be able to make it really work, right?
But I think as well that part of that mindset shift is I 100% do not advocate for 100% remote. Like, got to be going and physically seeing. Like, I was talking to an organisation this week who are looking at making a couple of hires through us, and I said, don't think that it's a deterrent putting in there that, like, they're based in Orange, which is like a beautiful town in Western New South Wales, like that putting in, we will cover your costs, accommodation to come to Orange for a week, a quarter. Like, don't think that'll be a deterrent, especially if you're hiring a woman, especially if you're hiring someone with kids. I promise you, they're going to love to have a week away that work's paying for in a beautiful town, to be able to see clients face to face and to be able to hang out with the team and go out to dinner and do those things. Like, they are so important. Like, when you sort of see organisations that are 100% remote, especially challenging when, and I guess it's a bit tricky now when you've got distributed over time zones and countries and things, like, it's still so important to physically see people, which has been challenging for those organisations. But if you're Australian-based, like, you've got to be seeing them at least once a year. And that's not enough, but at least once a year, book somewhere nice. Like, people say, oh, I'm a small business, I haven't got enough money to do that. Well, I'll tell you what, it will cost you way more to replace them when they quit, because they feel completely out of the loop and they haven't seen anyone for 3 years.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think that kind of reason to get together, if it's a nice one, right? Like, if it's a good one. And also meeting with clients face to face, it makes it a bit special. And I used to have a conversation on the podcast, and obviously I do all my podcasts remotely, but I just love when I get to meet my podcast guests in person. It's like such a special experience. But aside from that, not talking about me, I'm still talking about me, I suppose, but I would have a conversation with people on the podcast, and I would say, and this is before, everything, so 2019, 2018, whatever. And I would say, oh, well, you will meet the person first, then you can have a digital professional relationship with somebody. And I was like, dude, I don't have time to just like go and meet everybody to start my professional relationship with somebody. I started online. It's on LinkedIn. It's on the podcast. I mean, having a podcast really helps because people will come and talk to you on the podcast, and you develop. Now I'm giving out all my secrets that I just talk to people on podcasts. But it really is like networking on steroids. We've had this one conversation. You know who I am. I know you. And then we can connect further after that. Or also, when you're a podcast guest, now you've joined this crew of podcast guests, that then you have something in common to reach out to people, which has happened quite a lot as well. But yeah, now I think it's shifted. It's like you can meet people digitally and you can do that for a long time. But then, yeah, there's a point where you're like, oh, cool, let's meet in person, and how great that is when you meet at conferences, you're bonding over certain things. I think it's really, really key.
And I think, like, not all of us are so privileged to have a podcast to use as the digital foreplay of a relationship. But I'll tell you what, just even the difference that having something like LinkedIn. So obviously I've been able to creep away on what you've been up to over the last however long, and this then I don't feel it coming in cold because I've read things that you've published. I've seen videos. I've done all these sorts of things that I think it sometimes is a bit odd when you then, not odd, but like you said, exciting when you meet them in the flesh. You're like, oh, I feel kind of creepy because I want to hug you because I already feel like I know you.
Totally. And it's interesting. And like, I mean, I do the same to my podcast guests, right? I don't like just randomly pick people that posted one thing one time. I'll go, oh yeah, cool. Oh, yep, they've done that. They've done this. And so when I meet people, I feel like, yeah, you already have a certain knowledge of what's going on. That's why I think the digital footprint is so important, and not in like, oh, look at me kind of way, but it's like your digital, like it's your vetting before you meet people, which, to be honest, that's how you build trust in a digital world, right? And I think it's not appreciated enough, and it will be soon. Like, I mean, people are getting there. I mean, it makes sense. But particularly for businesses, for professional, like as in client relationships as well. Like, I want, my local governments that want to hire me, I want them to Google me and go, yes, this, yes. Not, nothing came up, or some website, maybe we'll invite her to this, or whatever the case may be. And also speaking and all those type of things, you need to have that. But yeah, I think that's also really important for your like employers and employees and staff, that remote work. How do we connect then, continue to connect after we've made that initial hire and, are working remotely? But yeah.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think that just going back to that footprint thing, and it's taken me a lot of time. I'm a complete extrovert. I'm a high I on disc. Like, love being the centre of attention, always, like, even as a teenager was definitely class clown and things, but that difference of transitioning into your career-wise and having that personal brand thing that everyone sort of talks about, it's still quite uncomfortable for me, and I find that quite challenging, and I think that does turn a lot of people off, and that when you do look for them, there's like this ghost or a weird shell of a LinkedIn profile, but because they're awkward or embarrassed to put things out there. But it's been very much a process and something that I have had to actively be like, get over yourself. Like, this is how you move forward. You don't have a marketing budget for your business. Like, you have to market yourself. And applying for competitions and awards and things like that, that was a choice for me, that this is how we get street cred, is that we get a gong. I get to have my speech at Parliament House recorded and I can stick it on LinkedIn. Like, people can have a look at that. And like you said, build that street cred. And the thing is, when you're dealing with organisation like local government, like, well, all levels of government, they need to see that, yes, there is some human behind the organisation if you are not a big mega multinational. Like, you've got to either be at either end, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's stuff that I talk about too. It's like building that digital footprint. It's not like, it's not a 101 in how to use Canva, right? Or whatever. It's actually the strategy behind it. And, it's different for different people. But exactly what you were just saying, you don't just magically get awards, right? Or even nominated for awards. You go out, you make a conscious choice, because that way, one, I also like to meet the other people, right? It's a brilliant way of meeting people. But two, yeah, then you can build some of that cred behind you, because otherwise other people doing other things will apply for them regardless. It's actually not about you. Like, it's, and I find, people are like, oh, isn't it weird, writing about yourself all the time or whatever? And it's like, no, you have to think about why you're doing it, because you want to make a difference in the world. So to make a difference in the world, you need people to actually find what you've been doing and then react to that, and then they make a change. And, it's this impact thing. And I think if you start thinking like that, and then it becomes less self-absorbed, and then you go, oh, okay, I get it now. I'm actually talking about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And then that's where the shift and the change can happen.
100%. And I had some pretty tough talking tos by a couple of friends early on, and they were like, again, get over yourself. Think about how you make your purchases, how you shop, how you interact with a global marketplace. If you've got two products, i.e. a job matching platform, and you've got a big national, international one that everyone knows and everyone uses, and then you've got a newcomer, why are they going to choose the one or the other if you just go in as another faceless platform?
Absolutely.
Be the face. Because my thing at the start was like, why can't this just be a good idea? Why can't people just like this because it's a good idea? Why does it have to be that it's because it's a tech platform founded by a woman, founded by a mother, founded by someone that lives in a rural area? And it was really like, ugh, for me. But then when I got this, again, tough talking to, flip it. Okay, yes, here, I have a tech platform. I'm a rurally based woman with kids, and I'm doing this in the trenches with them. Like, and people love that. And people
want the human, right? Because it's a good idea. Like, the product is good, right? The quality's there, all those things, which other platforms will have. But there's this human that people then can connect with. And I think and I used to work for government, and I was invisible, right? And then coming out of that, bringing the human back to everything that I do and work and life and whatever. It was, I shouldn't say, when I was, I guess, working in government, it was like, this was work and this was human. But we don't that's not how we operate, right? That's not how we live. And that's not how I live in particular. People are very different.
But that's an interesting way that you've just put that as well, because we talk a lot about, I'm throwing out the concept of work-life balance. It is a work-life blend. You don't do work and then do home or life. They are part of you. You're at work 2/3 of your life or something soul-destroying like that. And if you are trying to keep them separate, then it just doesn't work. And so you've got to, and I think that's even more so when you're doing it in a remote or a hybrid way. Like, and I think that has been such another positive that's come out of 2020, is that humanizing of people, of senior leadership in government or in corporates or things. Like, we saw that BBC report years ago where the kids came bowling in, and that was such an anomaly still. Like, whereas now people have had that, and especially, Victorians had that a lot longer, and for more opportunities for people to, have a perv over someone's shoulder into how they decorate their house, or that they met spouses and they met kids and all of these things that never happened before, that it has humanised us, and this work-life thing being separate, or if there's a way to balance it, is not a thing. Like, I think that's what has been a really big takeaway of the last 12 months.
And I like to think of it as, rather than work blending into our lives, our homes have been blending into work, because, like you said, it's 2/3 of our life that we're working. But it's allowed us to, my cat's sitting here, like I would never have my cat in my office, but like kids coming in, like you were just saying, spouses or whatever, or, I get a text message from my partner who's like, I've made you lunch. Do you want me to bring it in, or are you in a meeting? Like these type of things. And when you were talking about earlier, I really enjoy being in my home, because I was never in my home before. I was here a couple of days and I'll be there in an office or whatever. And that makes it really special when you do leave, whereas not a thing that you have to do when you do leave. But yeah. Okay, I've realised that I haven't asked you any questions at all about smart communities, but I think we've talked about community building, we've talked about remote working, we've talked about the tech platform that you have, but we haven't talked about the technical side of things, because actually it's about what are the outcomes, what is the outcomes that it delivers for people, which I love. I want to talk about emerging trends though. What are the emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough?
From my world, I think that what we are not talking about is the impact that one's salary has on a whole rural community. I think people, like, you do the math on it, it's like super crazy. So my go-to statistic that I pull out at any opportunity is and this was pre-COVID, so I'm assuming that it would be probably a little bit more skewed now, but in 2012, when the Grattan Institute said this, they said that if 6% of women in Australia, additional women, were participating in the workforce, that our national GDP would be $25 billion higher. Like, that, when you break down the numbers, is just so bonkers. And then I see that on a really micro scale, in that, like, so we say put someone into a job where they're getting paid $80,000 a year, and they live in Western Queensland, and what that salary does, not only to that individual on all of that feeling of being part of a team, of financial independence, of being involved, of using your skills, all of those things. Like, most people want to work, and they want to do a good job at their work. And so that individual gets all of those things. That family gets a second income. So say if this is a farming family, that is an off-farm income that helps to drought and disaster-proof themselves. But what that then does for that family is it allows them to stay physically there, so that they can still play netball, they can be part of the footy club, they can be in the CWA, they can contribute on that social part and be part of that social fabric of that community. But fiscally, and that real local economic stimulus that $180,000 salary has, is it means that they shop at the IGA rather than driving 5 hours to Mount Isa to a Woolies. Or it means they go to the pub every second Friday for dinner. It means that the renos they've been dying to do, they actually get the curtains done locally. They are spending that money in a really localized way. And I just don't think that, like, the impact that has in a rural area, I just don't think is publicised enough, or is understood, or they can't until you say it like that. And you can't say that to everyone, because it's really hard to tell 25 million people that story. But it's I think that's something that I think is a trend, like we're seeing. Like, we worked with putting a woman into a 6-figure job in Broken Hill, like, unreal. And she literally, they fly to their holiday rather than driving. They do different things, and they are spending more money. And I was reading some statistics, and I can't remember the other day, but it was talking about the amount of money, especially with women. So if you're putting women into work, that impact that has on local economies is just even greater, because they do most of the spending. 75 or 80% of the household spending is made by women, and what that happens if they're choosing, just like we were talking about earlier, they will more likely pay more for a product that has a face behind it or a story behind it. They will shop locally because they know they see that shop owner at school pickup, or they play netball with them, or all of those sorts of things. So I feel that that's something that we just don't think about, and that's the sort of stuff that I ear-bash politicians about at any given.
No, I love that. And thanks for sharing that. Just thinking back also, it also allows, like I grew up in Roma, right? So small town, and have lived in smaller towns, but also allows people to step out of survival mode into this, what can I do for other people as well? And I was thinking about, when in Roma, like a lot of the things that things were sponsored by women or a company or a whatever. And so then people are able to step out of that. Okay, can I afford the groceries this, week, or do I go next week or whatever? That takes a lot of brain power, right? When you don't have enough to spare when you're just surviving, to actually go, okay, I've got enough now. Okay, I can choose to shop locally, those things. I can choose to support this thing that somebody's doing. But then also, okay, now what can I do? Maybe I can pay for a girl to go to school who wasn't able to afford her uniforms or whatever before. You can start making those decisions because you've got that foundation to build upon. And I think we don't talk about that enough at all, and particularly in rural areas where you don't just lose your job and go and get another one, right? Like and even like I think about in Roma, like you shopped at a place, and if you didn't like shopping at that place, that was too bad because that was the only place there. So you made do with what you could do. But then once you start spending in a different way, then that allows that shopkeeper maybe to get different products, different things. And you have conversations with the person behind the counter. The amount of times I probably went into, and I didn't really think about it at the time, I'd be like, hey, I'm really looking at buying this, this, and this. And then the next week, those things would be on the shelf. Like you don't think about those impacts, particularly when you're growing up in that. But then thinking back now, I think, it's so interesting and something that has to weave into this smart community space, because that can make such a huge impact.
And I think that where remote work really plays a role in that financial independence and stuff of people that are already there. So we talk a lot around using remote work as an attraction and retention of population tool. So obviously, like our training programs and things are really structured around that retention piece. Like how do you, it's like with any sales job, it's so much easier to hold on to your current clients than find new ones. So like hold on to the people that already live there. Like don't let them leave. Like give them access to the things they're wanting, the services and those sorts of things. But in order to attract new populations, like, I don't know, a huge challenge, like with most rural communities, is attracting medical professionals. So your doctors, your nurses, your allied health, like that's a huge challenge. And we've worked with a number of organisations, universities, the whole shebang around that retention, attraction first, but retention of medical professionals to rural areas. And what we just kept hearing was the challenge a lot of the time is the trailing spouse, and they're the handbrake. So the medical professional is happy to come, but they're less likely to stay long term, or they might do FIFO where they're spending less money if they're doing it like that, and they're not as committed because they've got a foot in two camps. Like that trailing spouse not wanting to go to Western Queensland as the spouse. So the husband of the doctor that moves out there, the husband doesn't want to go because he says, what am I going to do there? But whereas if that trailing spouse has the qualifications, or even better, already has a job that is willing to let them work remotely, or it's already a remote job, like that's how we see really huge impacts of that handbrake of the trailing spouse. That's how we can get people, and they stay and they bring their kids, and that's another 2 or 3 bums on seats in the local school that keeps the numbers up. It's more kids in the footy team. It's all of those things that, again, go back to that social fabric of a town. It's just a really exciting thing that we're really trying to push. And it's not just health, it's education, it's access to legal things, which is something that we've really sort of has become very apparent. I spoke at the New South Wales, they have a Rural Issues Day, they have a conference, and I spoke on a panel at their Rural Issues Day event, and it was talking around the issues and the challenges in rural communities where there is not adequate legal assistance. So if there's not access to a lawyer that can give advice on leaving a domestic violence situation, being like representing yourself in cases, so like higher levels of incarceration rates because they don't have adequate legal representation, like all of these things. And I was just like, it's another whole element of community, because I haven't really interacted personally with the law a huge amount, that you don't realise that when those things are not available to you in a town, that can have a really negative impact on the social sort of things in town.
And even the medical side of things too. Like I thought about it too much, to be honest, as well. But then even the medical side of things, you don't do something until you really have to. And so I imagine, there's studies and stuff on it, I'm sure, of what that does to people's health in regional areas as well. Lack of access, right? There'll be so many different things. Anyway, I realise we have to wrap up. It's been so great to talk with you, Jo. Let's finish off with how can people connect with you?
Well, LinkedIn is always good. I like a good creeping on LinkedIn, as we've established. So, Jo Palmer. You can head to our website, which is pointerremote.com.au, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We have a LinkedIn page also, as far as we're quite easy to find online. But, look, we really love also connecting with people that just have an interest in that economic development piece in rural communities. And I think that there's so much opportunity through collaboration, and I know that gets used a lot, but I think that we talk about that groundswell happening from individuals. It happens from when individuals meet other individuals that are doing things, and that's how things go really quickly and you make big change. And I think that's probably a really exciting way to be. I sort of don't want to go back to that not being that way, not being the way that you do things.
Yes, no, I agree. Well, thank you. Everyone can click away and find you there. Thanks again, Jo. And we'll talk soon. See ya.
Bye.
The Smart Community Podcast is brought to you by My Smart Community. If you're looking for support in podcast strategy and production, workshop design and facilitation, or communication and media advisory, get in touch. Email hello@mysmart.community or head to www.mysmart.community.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcast. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter @SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.